welcome to Round Robin. I'm Robin McCormick, the Communications Director for the City of Hampton, and my guest today is Weston Young. He's the city's stormwater engineer, and he's going to tell us about one of the new projects that he has going. Welcome, Weston.
Hey, thank you for having me again.
It's great when you come because I read a lot of stuff, and I know the city got a grant, and none of it makes a bit of sense to me. So you're going to dumb it down so even I can understand. But today we're talking about Coliseum Lake Retrofit. What the heck is that?
Exactly. So, yeah, one of our big projects will be retrofitting the lake outside of the Hampton Coliseum.
Which is a beautiful, actually, a wonderful, lovely amenity, but it now serves a purpose. Like originally it was a borrow pit,
yes.
Right? I didn't know that.
When they were constructing 64, they needed fill material. So they dug this area up and they created what we call the Coliseum Lake. At the time, they just called it a borrow pit because that's where you get material from.
Right.
And since then, what we found when we did a watershed study in that area was that 362 acres drain to the Coliseum Lake. So in terms of the state and federal mandates that we're trying to meet in terms of water quality, we found what we do to this lake will clean and treat 362 acres of Hampton, which is mostly built out. So that's a lot of businesses and houses that when it rains, water drains from those areas and comes to this lake. So this is kind of low-hanging fruit for in terms of us meeting our water quality efforts.
Right, and so it sort of became a retention pond over time as that area became more and more paved. Because when you look at the Coliseum Central, I'm sure this is before my time, but when the interstate was expanded, it wasn't all built. It wasn't all paved and buildings. There was probably a lot more open space that absorbed the water gradually rather than creating all the runoff.
Exactly, and that's part of the reason why we have these new state and federal mandates. We have new stormwater regulations coming in from the state. And it's as development progressed over the years, we do get more impervious areas, so more rooftops, more driveways, even compacted soil doesn't allow water to infiltrate, and you get more of it running off. Well, where does that go? Well, it goes downstream. It could be a neighbor's property, it could be a creek. What you find is the more water you have rushing to an area, it starts taking dirt with it. So you get erosion, you get pollutants, you get a host of contaminants coming with that water.
Right, everybody's, either fertilizer runoff or any of those things, but also just natural stuff.
Exactly, and so with it all coming to the lake, it's sort of acting as a treatment already, because as the water comes into the lake, before it goes into New Market Creek, there's a bank there. It has a spillway, so
right.
It looks like a dam in a lot of ways, where it keeps the water back, and then when it rains, that water will then spill over into New Market Creek. So there's some pollutants that are getting trapped there. What we're looking at doing are putting certain construction aspects in there that will help trap additional sediment and provide pollutant removal, mainly nitrogen and phosphorus, which are part of a larger effort to clean the bay. So we're keeping it out of New Market Creek, which drains to the back river and then to the Chesapeake Bay. So this improvement will considerably help Hampton in terms of meeting its pollutant reduction goals. So
it sort of naturally over time became a retention pond, but you're going to make it a much more efficient retention, detention, and there's both. I thought it was a typo when I saw it, but there's retention ponds and detention ponds. What's the difference? Yeah,
one of the big differences is over time there's different designs. If you have a pond or a stormwater structure in your neighborhood, depending on what year it was built, most of them came in the early 90s, and over that time, things have evolved. And in the case of detention versus retention, sometimes is it storing water currently? And has it rained? That's a big thing. There's some that are dry, so you go out and you just see, it looks like an empty pond. You can walk on it, it's grass, and you see them in many cases, and people just maintain them with a lawnmower or grass cutter. In other cases, you see a stormwater structure and there's always water in it. Well, those are just two different designs. Nowadays they have more designs which involve utilizing plants in terms of what we call bioretention or engineered wetlands. And those plants, besides catching the water and slowly releasing it, those plants will pull water out. They'll also pull nutrients and pollutants. And it's not just nitrogen and phosphorus like what you find in fertilizers. I know a professor at Hampton University is studying arsenic and how certain ferns
metals,
will pull arsenic out of the water.
Wow.
So we've been looking at partnering with Hampton University as well in terms of how can we do these projects such that we're pulling pollutants out of the water.
Now, one of the things, I used to get a lot of criticism about this when I worked at the newspaper, but phosphorus and nitrogen aren't bad. I mean, the Chesapeake Bay needs some of them. The problem is it's out of whack, and there's too much in there already.
Exactly. It's I think one comparison is when you're dealing with a population of deer. They're natural. There's a few of them, but if you get too many of any species, really, that's when you start getting the impacts of too much vegetation being eaten and things can't grow any longer, or you're hitting them with your cars and things like that. So while nitrogen and phosphorus are natural, when you have too much, what it ends up doing is it feeds the algae in the water. So when you see an algae bloom, which are more and more common, you see them after rainfalls especially, they basically end up choking out the plants underneath at the bottom of the waterways. They block sunlight. The sediment coming into the water from the same type of pollution will make it harder for things to breathe, such as oysters and the like. But what that algae also does is to reproduce, it pulls oxygen out of the water.
Right.
Well, fish need that to breathe, and it's a host of those nutrients cause a host of issues that. So when you see an algae bloom, there's little we can do with it. It's more trying to prevent
that from happening.
Getting there. And for homeowners, usually we have the cooperative extension that they recommend doing a soil sample of your yard. And it'll tell you the exact amount of the nutrients you need to put in your property. Now, one of the efforts the state has taken is they are banning phosphorus in fertilizers.
I heard that.
So that's gonna complicate some things. Now I think commercial applications can still use it, but that will help in the pollution side of things. But it's still there. We got a lot going on. There's a lot of natural, like in compost, and just dirt. When you see shoreline erosion and you see your shoreline washing away, well, in that soil, in those roots, there's natural nitrogen and natural phosphorus that are getting into the waterway at that point. So it's a bigger task at hand and it's not just the stormwater sections of each city that are doing it. Agriculture has new regulations coming into play, and even just from a waste standpoint, people on septic tanks, which every year we try to move people in septic tanks to our sewer system. Septic tanks don't treat for nitrogen. So that just lets nitrogen get into the groundwater, which eventually makes its way to our waterways as well. So it's a complex issue, and from a city standpoint, we're trying to do what we can to prevent various pollutants. And one of these things involves the Coliseum Lake.
So how much is that going to cost?
We're estimating it'll be $1.2 to $1.5 million total. And being
good news.
Yeah, the good news, being proactive, we have a grant writer on staff, and we secured through a state local assistance funds almost $500,000 to help go towards this project. So what that'll help us do is spend more money elsewhere.
Right.
Now, in other water quality projects. So the federal government and the Chesapeake Bay pollution diet has given Hampton, you need to remove this much of each pollutant, and we're able to make our money go further by going for projects like the Coliseum Lake, which treats 360 acres of the city, to supplementing the costs of those projects with grants, and then that lets us spend our money further. So we're trying to be as efficient as possible, as well as do the best we can. The low-hanging fruit is the method we're going for right now, and we'll see how far that'll get us in terms of.
And so what you mean by low-hanging fruit is sort of picking the projects that are going to reduce pollutants the most for the least cost. It's a cost-benefit kind of analysis, right?
Exactly, and we also look at if the project will reduce flooding in the area, because we try to make sure our projects have multiple positive effects. In the case of Coliseum Lake, there will be some flood reduction, but it's primarily a water quality treatment. In terms of how much it treats, we viewed this as we have to do it. And in most of our other projects, we try to get things that will both clean the water as well as reduce flooding in neighborhoods.
And increasing the amount of water that lake holds will have, some potential benefits for flooding, because you've made it so that you're going to trap more sediment, which means you're not going to keep throwing that dirt on the bottom of that pond and decreasing its volume, and you're going to have some additional kind of wetlands components also. Yes.
Now on the flooding aspect, one of the things we deal with is not just we have rainfall flooding, but then we also have tidal flooding. So by what we'll be doing is raising the outfall of the dam slightly. So
outfall means?
The outfall is where the water leaves.
Where the overflow.
Where the water overflows from. We have a little concrete spillway, but it leaves the pond or the lake and goes to New Market Creek. So we'll be raising that slightly to where when we have high tides, sometimes the flooding in Hampton is based on having an extreme high tide, whether it's a nor'easter or a hurricane. So this will kind of prevent certain high tides from getting into the lake and backing water up. But as part of the project, what we're doing is two main treatment practices. One is basically creating walls that will help trap sediment as it comes in, because what sediments are basically, if you imagine coffee grounds in coffee, well, the heavier it is, it'll float to the bottom faster.
Okay.
Well, if you really, really do a fine ground, you're going to have some particulates that float longer, and it takes longer. If you wait,
for them to settle.
It'll all settle. And you do that also if you just if you go to New Market Creek and you take a cup of something and you look at how murky it is. Well, if you give it time, things will settle out. So when the area near the Coliseum Central that drains to Coliseum Lake, that water will come with all different types of sediments in it. And as it moves towards the outfall to go to New Market Creek, those sediments will gravity will be pulling them down, and depending on their size and all of that. Some will stay near the top and just go right into New Market Creek, and then when we get requests for dredging various water bodies, and boaters will tell you, flat out, they see, sedimentation coming in, and part of that is stormwater's effects. So what we try to do by putting up these walls is, as the sediment's moving, it'll hit the wall and then settle down. So over time, we'll have to go out and clean these
those sort of traps, basically.
Yeah. So it's a trap. And what we do is we're going to have two different types. We have an earthen one, which will be, so this will all be under the water. You may be able to see it from the roadway.
So when you're done, it won't look any different.
It
spend all this money, but it's all underground kind of things.
It's all going to be, at the top of the embankments will probably be water level. So you may be able to see the top of them. But as sediments come, we have earthen embankments, and we're also going to be driving sheet pile, which is kind of like a metal wall that we'll be putting in the center of the lake. That'll help do a secondary trap. So we're really going after sediment with these cases. Now what we're also doing is along the shores, we're going to create what we call wetland banks. So about a foot or so underneath where the water level typically is, we're going to have basically a embankment.
Okay.
Sand or whatever type of soil it's ultimately called out for. And then you'll have wetland plants in there. So kind of when I was mentioning earlier about bioretention or wetland practices, these plants will be specifically designed to live in the water, but also, or selected, not designed, but selected to pull nutrients out of the water. So everything from nitrogen and phosphorus to heavy metals and whatever else the plants pull out of the water. So by the time the water enters the lake and by the time it leaves, there's going to be several different practices that are in there that will be attempting to clean the water. So New Market Creek and then the Back River and then the Chesapeake Bay should see positive effects from what we're doing by treating these 362 acres.
That's awesome. And I know this is mandated, but it is that goal of cleaning up the bay, and it's sort of forcing the city's hand to do it now and to do it at a certain pace. But these are really important projects.
Exactly.
That we would have chosen to do at some point anyway.
Yeah, it's one of the big things with the regulations is they say we see the bay getting better, but it's not fast enough.
It's slow, right,
And the EPA was sued. And they lost the case, and now they're coming down to each state. There's 6 states and the District of Columbia that are having to do these bay cleanup efforts.
And it's important to remember this is, partly our livelihood and partly why Hampton and Hampton Roads is such a great place to live is our waterways, is the navigation, is the health, is the seafood, is part of the economy. I mean, all these things are essential to our city.
Exactly, and algae blooms cause fish kills.
Right.
And when we want to
and heavy metals make the fish such that you don't want to eat them.
Exactly. There's a lot of benefits to living on the water, and we want to preserve those.
That's right.
And by doing a project like this, New Market Creek will see results, and that's one step. We're looking at this citywide. We're doing watershed studies all over the city, currently 3 a year, and it's giving us opportunities and options to examine each waterway, each neighborhood. How can we improve the water quality like with Coliseum Lake, but also how can we reduce flooding, which flooding has its own environmental issues as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll tell you what we're going to do then. If you will make this commitment to come back periodically, break these projects down, and explain to people what we're doing and why and what the benefits are. I know I learn a lot, and I think the folks out there learn a lot too.
Yeah, I'd love to do that.
All right. Thank you, Weston. Thanks for coming by. And I hope you've learned as much as I have about pollution and the Chesapeake Bay and what we're doing to make that situation better. Thank you.